So I'd like to introduce Seth. His talk is going to be on bijections between two different classes of plane partitions, and it's going to be interactive, well, not semi-interactive. He's going to have Minecraft to demonstrate some of these principles.
Cool, thanks Brian. Thank you, Nate. So before we get into the fun of Minecraft, I'm going to start with a few things on the board. So I will dive right into a definition here. So when I say a partition, I mean a partition of an integer. So a way of splitting up an integer into its constituent parts, right? So an example of this would be if I wanted a partition of 7, I could do 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1. And a nice way to visualize this is with stacks, sort of these diagrams like this. So we can stack blocks in a corner and let the columns sort of denote each of the size of each of the parts. So 3, 2, 1, 1. I think if you took combinatorics with Maria, she did this differently, so this would be like 4 plus 2 plus 1, but you just choose an orientation that you like. I'm not going to talk about these kind of partitions today, but sort of a generalization of them. So in like the late 1800s, a guy named Percy McMahon introduced a generalization of a partition that he called a plane partition. And as the name suggests, it's sort of like a partition. But now we can, instead of using just a linear array of numbers, like a sum, we can use a planar array. So I could do something like this. Right? And similar to how we can visualize these kinds of partitions as a two-dimensional diagram, we can visualize these kinds of plane partitions as a three-dimensional diagram, where now we think about these numbers sort of denoting the height of the stack as it comes out of the board. So these plane partitions look like this. Okay, so again, the number of total blocks here would be the sort of the number that we're starting out with, the 7. In this case, I think this is maybe like 35. I don't know. Okay, so the maybe first question you would ask about these plane partitions is, how do we count them? Right? How many of them are there, and what do those kinds of questions mean? And the answer here is we count them by the size of the box that they fit in. So we construct a box and then ask, how many different ways can we build a plane partition here? And really what that is like, okay, you give me a box and all of the ways that I can stack blocks inside of there so that they're stable underneath, kind of through all 3 directions of gravity. So back, right, and down in the picture on the screen. Questions about what I mean by a plane partition? Cool. So again, this Percy McMahon is the one that defined these, and he's also the first one to answer this question of how many plane partitions are there? So in 1915, I think he had this result earlier, but published it in a textbook in 1915. There will not be a ton of formulas in this talk, but the ones that there are kind of long to write down, so bear with me. Okay, so what this is saying is that in a box with dimensions like r by s by t, there are the number of plane partitions are enumerated by this mess. Okay, well, what does that mean? Let me just write down what this, if we evaluate this, what this might look like. So the denominators magically vanish somehow. And so we get something like this, where the exponent is referring to the number of cubes in the plane partition. And the coefficient is the number of plane partitions with that number of cubes. Right, so this is saying, so basically what I've written down here is what you get if you let r, s, and t go to infinity. And what this is saying is that there are exactly 3 plane partitions with 2 cubes. And we could write those down. It's, just 2. I could put 1 there and 1 there. I could do 1 and 1. And so on. So this gives you, there's a corresponding generating function, which is the fancy word for when you let the limit of these r, s, and t go to infinity.
Sorry, what's cube?
What's the exponent? Or
No,
what are the cubes? They're these boxes here, or
Not a cube,
these
the
cubes
letter
here.
Q as in quiet.
It's a
Oh,
counter.
yeah, it's just a variable. I think Maria said maybe it stands for quantum in some historical context.
Okay, it's a combinatorics thing though.
Yeah.
Oh.
Other questions? Yeah.
Looking at like these pictures and the way that you write the plane partitions, are there any ways, like, any restrictions on how you write them? Like, it looks like they have to be like increasing or decreasing in the rows and the columns.
Yeah, so the way that I think about them is as stacks of blocks in the corner, and then it's just, they have to be stable under all 3 directions of gravity. So if you sort of like tilt your corner down like this.
Yeah.
If you're just writing them down like this and thinking about them as like plane partitions, then they have to be weakly decreasing along rows and columns.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So those are plane partitions. And so McMahon answered how many of these general plane partitions there are inside of some box. Fast forward to 1985, and Richard Stanley gives a talk at a conference in Montreal where he lists some more conjectures about plane partitions. And these conjectures concern special types of plane partitions, basically trying to play the same game, enumerating plane partitions by their box size and number of blocks, but for special types of plane partitions. And those special types are mostly symmetry classes. So, for example, this is a symmetric plane partition. You can see that it is symmetric about this sort of diagonal here. A way to think about this is that if I give these axes, if I name them x, y, and z, then I can switch x and y without changing my partition. So that was one of the symmetry classes he looked at. Another one was cyclically symmetric plane partitions. So if we thought about the last one as being a reflection, this thing is fixed under rotations. And the last symmetry class is this totally symmetric plane partition. So objects, or these kind of partitions are fixed under the entire action of the symmetric group S3. Right? So any rotations, any reflections. So in some sense, these are the nicest ones. But of these 13 conjectures that he lists, so he wants a similar, he wants basically this for each of these, and he lists these formulas in a lot of these cases. And this was the last one unsolved. So this was known as the TSPP conjecture. Yeah, TSPP for totally symmetric plane partition. And it ends up looking kind of similar to this formula.
Sorry, why it's called partition?
Why are these called plane partitions?
Why there's a the word partition?
So because we can think about partitioning a number in a planar array like this, that's where the name comes from. Yeah. I think when people were originally working with these things, they had to work with them just on paper. I guess they didn't have Minecraft back in the late 1800s. So now it's kind of like a weird name because we think plane partition and it's a three-dimensional thing, but that's the context. Okay, so yeah, the QTSPP conjecture was that these totally symmetric plane partitions were enumerated like this. Okay, so it's actually, this part of it is exactly the same as in the case of just regular plane partitions with no restrictions. So the restriction is in where these I, J, and K come from. Here they could be anything, you know, ranging in sort of the boundaries of the box, 1 to R, 1 to S, and 1 to T. But now they need to be weakly increasing. And okay, so this was just a conjecture. 12 of these conjectures got proved, and then the last one, this one, became a formula in 2011. And that was due to John, Cowers, and Zielberger. I think the conjecture itself was in that 1985 paper of Stanley's.
Sorry, formula for what?
Yeah, so it's enumerating these totally symmetric plane partitions. But I've sort of lied to you in the sense that here, this was enumerating by the number of, you know, cubes in this diagram. But in this formula, we're actually enumerating by the number of orbits in this thing. And I'll show you why that feels natural in just a second. Other questions? All right. I promise I checked this ahead of time. There we go. All right. I'm not claiming to be good at Minecraft or even capable of getting the thing to work, but here we are. So here I have a 4x4 box, 4x4x4 box, right? See, it's 4 blocks long. And I just want to use this to start building some of these totally symmetric plane partitions. So if I think about this as being the corner, and everything that I built here has to be stable, and of course it has to be symmetric about all of these actions of S3. So to start off, I have the empty partition, which we're looking at, yay. I only have one choice for the first thing that I can write down, or for the first block that I can place. It's the only place where it would be stable under gravity. Any questions about that? Cool. As it turns out, for my second placement, I still only have one choice, right? I could put it sort of have 3 choices. Put it there, there, or there. But as soon as I place one of those, I have to fill in the other 2 to maintain the symmetry. Right? And so we have to, so every time I place a block, I have to place all of the blocks in its orbit. And for that reason, this thing is counting the orbits of these totally symmetric plane partitions, not the actual number of blocks. Just that the orbits are a more natural object to count when you have these symmetry classes. So I could add a red one here, here, and maybe something like that, and that. Okay. So any questions about how I'm constructing these totally symmetric plane partitions?
So this has 4 orbits, and so it's counted by the q to the power of 4.
Yes. And I want to write out a few terms of this. So again, sort of as n goes to infinity, this thing becomes, evaluates to, and I'm going to write out, I said a few, but I'm going to write out a bunch of terms here. Because the beginning of this sequence is pretty boring, and I want to convince you it's not. 4 q to the 5th, 6 q to the 6th, 7, 17 q to the 9th. So yeah, we have, in this case, we have 4 orbits, right, denoted by the 4 different colors here. And so that means that this is one of the 3 totally symmetric plane partitions with 4 orbits, right? If we back up a little bit, we can go back to the 1 orbit. So we have 1 empty plane partition, right? Q to the 0, 0 orbits. Then I have this 1 plane partition with 1 orbit. And again, there's only 1 place that I can place the 2nd orbit. And so there's only 1 of those as well. And then we saw that we get a choice here of whether to kind of place there or there. And that's the 2 with 3 orbits. Is that all clear? Cool. So, like I said, in 2010 they proved this formula. Amazing, right? These are really nice objects, and they're nicely enumerated. And that's sort of where the story pauses, at least.
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah.
When you say n orbits, you mean n elements in that orbit? So when you say a 3 orbit, you mean or 3
Colors.
3 colors?
Yeah. So in the thing that I've just written here, or created here, this would be 2 orbits. Because there's only 2 colors that show up.
Oh, I see.
If I want to refer to the size of the orbit, I would say like an orbit of size 1 or 3.
I see.
Yep. Good question, thanks. Cool. So last semester I got interested in a totally different class of plane partitions. And, well, I don't want to write these on the board, but I'll construct one here for you. They're not as pretty as these totally symmetric plane partitions. In fact, they're kind of ugly. But they come from some algebra that I'm not going to get into today, but they sort of have like a little bit of a staircase feel to them. So maybe something like this and that. Okay, so this would be an example of a strongly stable plane partition. And again, back in the days before we were doing this on Minecraft, we would write things like this maybe as like 3, 2, 1, right? If I orient myself sort of up above this thing, you can think about the heights as 3, 2, and 1. And if you write things down this way, then the condition for these strongly stable plane partitions is that they need to be strictly decreasing across rows and columns, and weakly decreasing along diagonals. And when we actually have the blocks of diagrams here, what that translates to is that if I look at any particular block and then count the number of blocks to the x direction of it, then the y direction of it, and then the z direction of it, that those 3 numbers are weakly increasing. So for example, if I look at this black block here at the base, in this setup, I've chosen a variable ordering. So this is my x direction here, that'll be my y direction, the red line, and up will be z. And so if I look from this black box perspective, it sees one block to its right, one block to its y direction, and 2 blocks above it. Right? So that vector, if you think about it that way, it would be 1, 1, 2. And so this property that I just described here in the planar partition setup is exactly the property that each of these hook vectors is weakly increasing. I'm not writing anything down here. If you don't understand that, it's not a huge deal to the talk here. But basically, these things are generally very not symmetric. Right? Just like so the totally symmetric plane partitions are like the most symmetric diagrams we could make in a box like this. And these things tend against symmetry. In fact, I can try to make them symmetric, and there's only a couple of times, sort of one instance that works in for each n. So this one is trivially a strongly stable partition and totally symmetric. Then I could do something like this, and this would also be strongly stable. Because if all of the white blocks are sort of have hook vector 0, 0, 0, there's nothing to the east, west, or north or above them, and the black one has a hook vector of 1, 1, 1, right? And so these sort of staircase objects that I could build are the only strongly stable partitions that are, I'm going to pause. They're the only strongly stable partitions that are also symmetric. In general, these strongly stable partitions are very asymmetric. They tend to favor the later variables. So if I did x, y, z, they're going to have bigger z, they're going to be kind of tall and skinny, and a little more y than x. Okay. So that's just philosophy on how I think about these things.
Okay, what would the next one look like?
So there's not like a good ordering here, so I don't have a next one, but I was just trying to illustrate that like I can build some of these. So let me just build this and then say what I'm going to say. So this would be another one that is symmetric, totally symmetric, and also strongly stable.
I see.
But it's like this very edge case of the strongly stable condition, where every hook vector has just the same coordinate showing up 3 times. Is it clear what I'm saying by hook vector? All right, so yeah, these strongly stable partitions in general are ugly, and they come from algebra. That's all I really want to say about them, other than they are in bijection with these much prettier, totally symmetric plane partitions, which is weird. And that's where Minecraft really comes in handy here. So, let's just build one of these totally symmetric plane partitions. Maybe something like this. So notice that up to this point we've only had orbit sizes of 1 and 3. But as soon as I place that green block, I need actually all 6 of those. And so I can have orbit sizes of 1, 3, or 6. And if I'll just add blue just for fun. And then I want to notice something about these partitions. So if I sort of zoom out here and look at this thing, it's sort of split up into 6 pieces in a natural way, right? If I just look at like this little sliver right here, all of the colors are going to show up there exactly once. Right? Every orbit is represented in this like fundamental region. And then I can sort of recover the rest of the plane partition by reflecting and then rotating things around. Everyone see that?
You need the corner behind it too.
Yeah, so we're keeping everything on the diagonal. Like everything that is pierced by a ray coming right out at us. So to make this, let's fill this in so this looks a little more fun. So the bijection is basically cut away the 5/6 of this that are unnecessary to understand this thing. So just keep this the blocks that are in this fundamental region, one of each color. Then collapse everything down, and then slide everything to the side. Right? Once we delete all of the other blocks that aren't in this fundamental region, we don't have a plane partition anymore because these blocks are just like floating out in space. And this isn't Pandora, this is Minecraft. So things have to sit, nicely in a corner. And so we just, after that, turn on the gravity sort of one direction at a time, and then we'll get our Borel ID. And, okay, here's a machine that does this. If you know how to do this, work with command blocks in Minecraft better, please stick around afterwards and let me know. I wish I would have built this thing further away from my box, but here we go. So this happens kind of all at once, but you will see the collapse and then the slide if you pay attention. So try the button, collapse, and then slide. You'll notice that before we used all 9 colors here, and we will have 9 blocks, one of each color, in the resulting strongly stable partition. So 4 plus 3 plus 2. And you can check that this hook vector property is maintained, right? So for any block here, there are, for like this block, there's 1 block to the right of it, 1 block to the other side of it, and 2 blocks above it. Another thing to notice about this bijection is that this sort of base column is never affected. So the smallest or the largest length of the bounding box, in this case 4, is always preserved. Another way to say that is that in an n by n by n box, there are exactly the same number of totally symmetric plane partitions that there are strongly stable plane partitions, exactly through this bijection. Okay, questions about how that worked? Yeah, Christina.
Can we get a replay?
Oh yeah, we're gonna do a bunch of them. I don't know if I can remember what one was just there, but we'll build some more. Yeah.
Couldn't you make if you made a strongly stable one that took up a lot of the box, and you wanted to go to the corresponding symmetric one, would you need a bigger box?
Yes, so in the sense that here I would need a 2 by 2 by 4 box, but if I just say, okay, whatever my longest length is, let me just extend that out to be, so the dimension's the same, uniform dimension on all 3. So instead of doing a 2 by 2 by 4, just extend that out to a 4 by 4 by 4, and you'll be good. Yeah. Other questions?
What took longer, understanding the bijection or making that little machine thing in Minecraft?
About the same. Yeah, that was actually really frustrating. I did not enjoy this part of the process. But it's nice now. So yeah, let's break this and make some more. So as it turns out, there are 66 possible totally symmetric plane partitions that you could build in this 4 by 4 box. So I definitely haven't tried them all, but
And we fly just off screen, they're all built already.
yeah. That would have taken another 4 days. So, okay. There are ways that you can load things. You can save structures and then load them later, but I did not get that involved. I don't know. Any suggestions for where to place the last one?
There.
All right. Cool. I don't know that I'm the most creative with building these things, or that how long it would take me to build all 66. But was that the one we did last time?
I think
No, it's not.
Oh.
All right, well, let's make it more different.
That might be the same as last time.
All right, if we delete the inner thing there, then it's just going to be a shell. What's going to happen here is that it's going to, I think it won't have anything, all of the blocks that are remaining will just fit in this sort of one side here. Oohs and ahs when I press the button. And realizing now that I should have had a bunch of these loaded, and that would be nice to just go through them in real time. But I'm not going to sit up here and just build these for you. If you want to stick around afterwards and build them yourself and click the button, feel free to do that. If you have any questions, also hang around. Thanks.
We're gonna clap. So if you make one that's like not totally symmetric and all this stuff, and then apply your machine, will it demonstrate why, like, the bijection occurs? Like why you can't do this for like an arbitrary?
No, because my machine is not very precise.
Oh.
My machine will work with my totally symmetric plane partitions, but what it'll do if I build something that's not totally symmetric is it'll still give me a strongly stable partition, but it's, you know, not unique to those. You know, it's unique to some totally symmetric plane partition, but not to whatever other mess I made.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Christina.
What would be the process to reverse it?
It would kind of the reverse visualization. You would slide things out, and there's some, like, you know, shifting that's detailed in a paper that you can read. Check out the description below. And then you'd send everything up, and then you'd sort of support the thing. Or you could think about, you know, shift, shift, and then rotate around to see where all the other blocks should be. Yeah. You want to try?
So, sorry, why the bijection is useful?
Oh, yeah. That's one thing I wanted to point out here. So this QTSPP formula was counting the number of orbits of a totally symmetric plane partition, right? The number of colors that showed up. And that corresponds to exactly the number of blocks in a strongly stable partition. So this thing is exactly the thing that I need to count these strongly stable partitions, as it turns out. So when I'm saying here there's 2 totally symmetric plane partitions with 3 orbits, that means that there are 2 strongly stable plane partitions with 3 blocks. So the number of orbits in the totally symmetric case corresponds exactly to the number of blocks in the strongly stable case. Does that answer your question?
I didn't understand. What was the usefulness?
The usefulness of the bijection?
Yeah, I mean, looking at one as another, is there any benefit?
The usefulness is that it gives me an enumerating function for the strongly stable partitions.
Oh, okay.
I connect these strongly stable partitions to these totally symmetric ones, and it gives me a way of counting them.
So the goal was to find strongly stable plane partition, counting that, right?
That's right. Yeah, thanks.